She was just watering her roses on a quiet Wednesday morning, the kind where the world feels gentle and predictable, until a police officer decided she didn't belong there. What began as a simple garden routine spiraled into public humiliation. A hose turned on full force, water slamming in her face, laughter in the air, neighbors lifting phones as her dignity washed down the curb. She stood there soaked, silent, trembling but unbroken. Then she reached in her pocket and pulled out one thing that changed everything. The morning unfolded the way it always did, slow, warm, and familiar. Sunlight slipped through the trees like a quiet blessing, settling gently over the small white house at the end of the street. Inside, soft jazz hummed from an old speaker on the kitchen counter, the kind of music that didn't demand attention but made the air feel kinder. She moved through her home barefoot, comfortable, unhurried, fully at ease in a life she had built piece by piece. Outside, the roses were already awake. Red, pink, and pale yellow blooms leaned toward the light, thirsty but patient. She carried the hose with practiced ease, watering each bush like an old friend, careful not to rush. Gardening was her therapy, her pause button in a world that often asked too much. This was her sanctuary. She had earned it. She was a successful woman, though you wouldn't know it from the quiet simplicity of her morning. Years of hard work, long nights, and sacrifices had brought her here. The house was paid for. The mortgage was gone. Every brick, every flower bed told a story of perseverance. This place didn't just belong to her. It knew her. Neighbors passed by on their morning walks. A woman across the street waved, coffee mug in hand. An older man nodded from his porch. There was comfort in these small gestures, in being seen and recognized without question. She smiled back, feeling rooted, safe, invisible in the best possible way. The street felt peaceful, almost protected by routine. No sirens, no shouting, just birds, water trickling into soil, and music floating through an open window. The kind of morning that made you believe nothing bad could touch you here. That this was one corner of the world where you could simply exist. She bent down to adjust the nozzle, unaware that somewhere behind her, that fragile sense of safety was already cracking, quietly, cruelly, about to be shattered in a way no one on that street would ever forget. The officer's voice changed first. It dropped, hardened, each word carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. What had started as sharp questioning now felt like a warning disguised as instruction. "You're being uncooperative," he said, though she had done everything asked of her. The sentence hung in the air like a verdict already decided. "I've answered you," she replied, her voice steady but strained. "I haven't done anything wrong." That was when respect fully disappeared. "Last chance," he snapped. "Do exactly what I say." Threats don't always arrive as shouting. Sometimes they come wrapped in calm, in authority, in the certainty that resistance, real or imagined, will be punished. She felt it then, the moment when the situation tipped past reason. Her body knew before her mind did. Her shoulders tightened. Her breath shortened. She took a small step back toward her porch, instinct more than defiance. The officer misread it instantly. "Stop moving." Before she could explain, before she could comply, his hand shot out, not to his radio, not to de-escalate, but toward the hose lying coiled near her feet. In one sharp motion, he yanked it up and twisted the nozzle. "No, wait," she began. The water hit her like a punch. A violent blast slammed into her face, knocking her balance clean away. The force was shocking, cold, relentless, unforgiving. She gasped, but the water rushed in faster than air could. It filled her mouth, her nose, her throat. Her words dissolved into choking sounds no one seemed ready to hear. She fell backward onto the grass, the world tilting violently as the sky disappeared behind a wall of white spray. The roses blurred above her, petals shaking under the assault meant for her body. The hose, once a tool of care, of patience, of quiet joy, had become a weapon in his hands. "Stop resisting," the officer shouted. She wasn't resisting. She was drowning. Her arms flailed as she tried to shield her face, but the pressure was relentless. Every attempt to breathe was answered with more water. Her chest burned. Panic surged, raw and animal. Somewhere nearby, someone screamed. Somewhere else, a phone hit record. Neighbors poured out onto porches and sidewalks. Gasps. Cries of disbelief. Cameras rose instinctively now. Hands shaking, lenses locked on the scene unfolding in front of them. No one could quite believe what they were seeing, yet no one could look away. The officer stood over her, unmoved. Water soaked her clothes, plastered her hair to her face, pinned her to the ground. Grass and dirt smeared against her skin as she tried desperately to turn her head, to find even a second of air. Her lungs ached, desperate, screaming for relief. "Please," she managed between choking breaths. "Please." The word was swallowed by the stream. This was the breaking point. The moment when fear curdled into terror, when confusion snapped into shock. The power imbalance was no longer subtle. It was crushing, undeniable. A uniform stood dry and upright while a woman lay on the ground, gasping beneath a force she could not escape. "Get off her," someone yelled. Another voice followed, then another. The street erupted into chaos. Neighbors shouting, phones recording, disbelief turning rapidly into outrage. Still, the water did not stop. Her thoughts scattered. She thought of her mother's voice, of unfinished emails, of the roses she hadn't finished watering. She wondered, fleetingly and horribly, if this was how stories ended, abruptly, unfairly, in front of witnesses who would later say they never imagined it could go that far. The officer barked commands that made no sense, words meant to justify what was already happening. His grip tightened on the hose. His face showed irritation, not concern. Control mattered more than consequence. Water filled her ears, roaring like a storm. The world narrowed to sensation. The burn in her lungs, the pounding of her heart, the helplessness of being pinned by force alone. She could feel her strength draining, her movements slowing. Then something shifted. A neighbor stepped forward, shouting the officer's badge number aloud. Another announced they were live streaming. Someone else screamed that they were calling a lawyer, the mayor, the news, anyone who would listen. The crowd pressed closer, anger rippling through them like electricity. The officer hesitated, just for a second. In that second, she sucked in a desperate breath as the stream wavered. Air tore in her lungs, sharp and painful, but life-saving. She rolled on her side, coughing violently, water pouring from her mouth as her body fought to recover. The hose finally dropped. She lay there shaking, soaked to the bone, gasping and coughing, her chest heaving as if she had surfaced from deep water. Her hands clawed at the grass, grounding herself in the simple fact that she was still alive. Around her, the street buzzed with fury and shock. Phone stayed raised. Voices overlapped. No one was calm anymore. The officer took a step back, eyes darting now, not with authority, but calculation. The power he had wielded so casually seconds ago no longer felt secure. The cameras were everywhere. The witnesses too many. She pushed herself up slowly, every movement deliberate. Water dripped from her sleeves, her hair, her chin. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood, soaked, silent, and staring straight at the man who had tried to break her. In that moment, the entire street understood something had crossed a line that could never be erased. The sound came first, not loud, just out of place. Tires crunching slowly against gravel. An engine idling where engines didn't usually linger. She felt it before she saw it, that subtle shift in the air that made her straighten up and glance toward the street. A patrol car had eased to a crawl in front of her house, moving far too slowly for coincidence. The officer inside didn't wave. He didn't smile. He stared. She told herself not to overthink it. Police drove through the neighborhood all the time. This was a nice street. Quiet. Safe. She turned back to the roses, adjusting the hose, pretending her heartbeat hadn't just changed its rhythm. Still, the car didn't move on. It idled there, heavy and watching, like a question waiting to be asked. Then the door opened. Boots hit the pavement. Measured. Deliberate. She could feel his eyes on her back as she shut off the water and turned around, forcing calm into her expression. The officer's hand rested casually near his belt, fingers brushing against equipment that carried authority and threat without a word spoken. "Morning," she said, polite, careful, the kind of greeting that tried to make things normal. He didn't return it. "What are you doing here?" he asked. The question landed wrong. Not what are you doing, but here, as if the space beneath her feet was already under dispute. She gestured vaguely toward the flowers. "Water in my garden. I live here." He squinted, eyes scanning the house behind her, then her clothes, then her face. Not listening, evaluating. "You got ID?" The request tightened something in her chest. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was standing on her own lawn, hose still dripping at her feet. But years of quiet lessons told her not to argue. Not yet. She wiped her hands on her jeans. "May I ask why?" His tone sharpened instantly. "Because I'm asking." There it was. The shift. The invisible line she had crossed simply by existing in a body he had already decided didn't belong. Neighbors slowed their walks. Curtains stirred. Phones hovered uncertainly in hands. The calm of the morning began to fray at the edges. "I own this house," she said, keeping her voice even. "My ID is inside." He stepped closer. Too close. "So go get it." The way he said it wasn't a request. It was a test. A reminder of who held the power in this moment. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she weighed every possible move. Turning her back felt dangerous. Standing her ground felt worse. Fear didn't scream. It pressed. It sat heavy, making each breath deliberate. "I'm not resisting," she said quietly, though no one had accused her of anything yet. The officer scoffed. "Didn't say you were. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder for whom? She wondered. For him, this was routine. Another stop. Another moment of authority exercised. For her, it was the familiar ache of being seen as a problem before being seen as a person. The knowledge that respect was conditional and currently revoked. He asked more questions, each one edged with suspicion. Who else lived here? How long had she been in the neighborhood? Where was she coming from? None of it made sense. All of it made one thing painfully clear. Her presence alone had triggered his interest. She noticed her hands trembling and forced them still. She thought about her achievements, the career she had built, the nights she had worked late to afford this exact slice of peace. None of it mattered here. None of it was visible. In his eyes, she was a question mark that needed answering. A neighbor finally spoke up from across the street. "She lives there," the woman said, hesitant but firm. "She's always gardening." The officer didn't even turn his head. "Mind your business, ma'am." Silence fell again, heavier now. The power imbalance was unmistakable. Uniform versus skin, badge versus voice. She could feel the moment slipping, the conversation no longer about facts but control. The fears settled deeper, quiet but insistent, whispering reminders of stories she'd heard, names she knew, endings she didn't want. She stood still, refusing to cry, refusing to raise her voice. Dignity felt fragile, but she clung to it anyway. Somewhere inside her, something hardened, not into anger, but resolve. She knew this moment mattered, knew that how she responded could change everything. The officer glanced back at the patrol car, then at her again, irritation flashing across his face. The morning that had once felt safe now felt like a stage, every eye watching, every second stretching thin. And without any real cause, without a crime, without proof, suspicion had already done its damage. Silence fell in a way that felt unnatural, like the street itself was holding its breath. The shouting faded first, then the frantic, overlapping voices quieted, one by one, until all that remained was the sound of water dripping from her clothes onto the grass. Plink, plink, plink. Each drop landed with weight, marking time in a moment that no one would ever forget. She stood there slowly, deliberately, as if every movement carried meaning. Her knees trembled, but she did not rush. She did not lash out. She did not collapse into tears the way everyone expected her to. Instead, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and took one long, steady breath. Calm settled over her. Not the absence of fear, but mastery over it. Her clothes clung to her skin, soaked and heavy. Her hair dripped down her shoulders. Her face was flushed, her eyes red from coughing and water. Yet there was something unmistakable in her posture now. Something that hadn't been there before. Not defiance, not anger. Authority. The officer watched her carefully, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time since he'd arrived. His stance shifted. The casual dominance was gone, replaced by caution he didn't yet understand. Around them, neighbors leaned forward, phones still raised, recording every second. No one spoke. No one interrupted. She reached into her pocket. The motion was unhurried, intentional. The officer stiffened. His hand twitched near his belt again, instinctively suspicious, still clinging to control even as it slipped through his fingers. "Don't," he started to say, then stopped himself. She pulled out a small leather wallet. Not dramatic, not flashy, just worn, professional, and unmistakably official. She opened it slowly and held it up at chest height, angled so the officer and the cameras could see clearly. Inside was a federal identification badge, gold seal, department insignia. Her name, printed clean and formal beneath a title that sucked the air from the street. United States District Judge. For a moment, the words didn't register. They hovered in the space between them, unreal, impossible. The officer squinted, took a step closer, then froze as recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face drained of color. The silence deepened, turning heavy, electric. Somewhere behind the phones and gasps, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice murmured, That's federal." She spoke then for the first time since standing up. Her voice was calm, level, not raised, not trembling. "My name is Judge Evelyn Carter," she said. "I have presided over federal court for 14 years. This is my home, and everything that just happened has been recorded." Each word landed with precision. The power in the street shifted instantly, violently, like a tide, reversing without warning. The badge on her wallet outweighed the one on his uniform by a margin he had never bothered to imagine. The hierarchy he relied on, the unspoken assumption of superiority, collapsed in real time. The officer swallowed hard. I didn't know," he stammered, suddenly aware of every camera pointed at him. "Ma'am, there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. The words sounded small now. Fragile. Inadequate. Judge Carter closed the wallet and slid it back into her pocket with the same composure she had used to pull it out. "No," she said quietly. "There hasn't." Her gaze never left his. "You assumed I didn't belong," she continued. "You escalated without cause. You used force without justification. And you did it in front of witnesses." She gestured slightly with one hand, not accusing, simply indicating reality. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a record." The officer's breathing quickened. He glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of the neighbors he had dismissed, the woman he had silenced, the phone still capturing every angle. His authority had evaporated. In its place was something raw and unmistakable. Fear. I was just doing my job," he said weakly. Judge Carter tilted her head, studying him the way she had studied defendants for years. Men who believed power would protect them, right up until it didn't. "Then you should know," she replied, "that my job is to uphold the Constitution, including the rights you violated today." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone let out a low, disbelieving laugh. Not humor, but shock at the reversal unfolding in front of them. The officer took another step back, then another, as if distance could undo what had already happened. His radio crackled to life, dispatch asking for an update. He didn't answer it. Instead, Judge Carter reached into her pocket again. This time, she pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked slightly from the fall, water beaded along its edges, but it was still recording. "I've already contacted my clerk," she said evenly, "in the U.S. Attorney's office. They'll be expecting a full report." The officer's shoulders slumped. "Yes, ma'am," he muttered, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. "Ma'am." Moments earlier, he hadn't offered her even basic respect. Now it came automatically, desperately. The balance of power had flipped so fast, it left him visibly unsteady. Sirens sounded in the distance, backup responding, too late to prevent what had happened, but right on time to witness the aftermath. A second patrol car pulled up, then another. Officers stepped out, scanning the scene, their eyes drawn immediately to the phones, the crowd, the soaked woman standing tall in the center of it all. One of them recognized her. "Judge Carter," he said, his tone instantly different. Controlled, respectful, alarmed. She nodded once. The first officer's face tightened further as understanding spread among his colleagues. This wasn't going away. This wasn't being brushed aside. This wasn't a complaint filed quietly and forgotten. This was public, federal, permanent. Judge Carter wrapped her arms loosely around herself, not in weakness, but to steady her still shaking body. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving behind exhaustion and the faint sting of pain in her chest. Still, her voice remained clear. "I will be filing a formal complaint," she said, "and I expect full cooperation." "Yes, Judge," the second officer replied immediately. The first said nothing. Fear had fully changed sides now. It clung to him in the way it had clung to her earlier. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. He looked at the hose lying in the grass, at the roses trampled beneath boots, at the woman he had tried to break. And for the first time that morning, he understood exactly how exposed he was. Judge Carter turned slightly, acknowledging the neighbors who had spoken up, recorded, refused to look away. "Thank you," she said simply. Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. One woman lowered her phone and whispered, "We've got you." As she walked toward her porch, slowly, steadily, the street remained silent, not because it was afraid anymore, but because it was witnessing something rare. Accountability, standing upright in soaked clothes, refusing to bend. The roses lay bruised behind her, but she was still standing, and nothing would ever be the same again. Consequences arrived faster than anyone expected. By nightfall, the videos were everywhere, shared, reposted, dissected frame by frame. What neighbors had instinctively recorded in shock became undeniable evidence by morning. Multiple angles, clear audio, no missing context, no room for excuses. The truth moved faster than damage control ever could. Witnesses began speaking openly. The woman across the street gave a statement through tears, describing how she had watched helplessly as authority turned cruel. The older man from the porch talked about the moment he realized silence would make him complicit. Others came forward too, voices steady, stories aligned. What they described wasn't confusion or chaos. It was escalation without cause. The department placed the officer on immediate leave before noon the next day. By the end of the week, that leave became termination. Internal reviews moved with unusual speed, propelled by the weight of public scrutiny and the presence of federal oversight that could not be quietly ignored. Body cam footage, once delayed, once debated, was released. It showed exactly what the neighbors' phones had shown: suspicion without justification, force without necessity, power without restraint. Statements followed, carefully worded at first, then more direct. "This conduct does not reflect our values. We are reviewing training protocols. We take these matters seriously." But the public had learned to listen beyond the words. Protests formed, not loud, not destructive, but deliberate. People stood with signs that didn't ask for punishment alone, but for change. Law students analyzed the footage in classrooms. Civil rights groups held forums. Commentators stopped asking what went wrong and started asking how often this goes unseen. Judge Carter did not seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. In a brief press statement, she spoke plainly. No grandstanding, no bitterness. "This was not about who I am," she said. "It was about what happens when assumptions go unchecked and power goes unquestioned. The law exists to protect everyone, or it means nothing." Her words carried because they were measured, because they were true. The officer's case moved swiftly through the system he had once relied on to shield him. Civil proceedings followed. Federal investigations expanded beyond one incident, examining patterns, complaints, quiet settlements that had never made headlines. The mirror had been raised, and what it reflected was uncomfortable. This wasn't just one man falling. It was a system exposed under bright, unforgiving light. Departments across the region announced policy reviews, some genuine, some performative. But the pressure was real, and it wasn't going away. Training manuals were questioned. Accountability boards restructured. Community oversight, once dismissed, became unavoidable. For Judge Carter, the aftermath was quieter. She returned to her bench after medical clearance, her presence unchanged, but her impact deepened. In her courtroom, she spoke about rights with renewed clarity, about dignity with lived authority. She did not mention the hose. She didn't have to. Justice, she understood better than most, is not revenge. It is not spectacle. It does not require humiliation in return. Justice begins with truth, with witnesses who refuse to look away, with cameras that keep recording, with systems forced to confront themselves, with accountability that arrives not as an apology, but as action. The roses in her garden were replanted weeks later. Some survived, some didn't. Growth was uneven, slower than before, but it came. And on that quiet street, people remembered what they had seen. Not just violence, but what happened when the truth stood up, soaked and silent, and refused to back down. That morning was never really about a garden hose. It was about who is believed, who is protected, and who is treated as guilty before a single word is spoken. If this could happen to a federal judge in her own front yard, imagine how often it happens to those without power, titles, or an audience willing to listen. Justice doesn't begin in courtrooms alone. It begins on sidewalks and front lawns. When ordinary people refuse to look away, when they record, when they speak, when they demand better. So ask yourself, if you were standing there that morning, would you have filmed, spoken up, or stayed silent? Because justice isn't passive. Justice is a choice.